Hello and welcome. My name is Keith Barker, and today it's Saturday. I'm going to take a little bit of time and add some additional storage, network-based storage, to my vSphere environment that's running right here in the rack behind me. So let me give you a quick overview of what we're working with. I've got I show three here, but I have four Dell servers. They are R630s. I got them used, and they are fairly affordable. On those servers, I'm running VMware's ESXi hypervisor, also sometimes called vSphere. And I'm also running the vCenter server that I'm using to go ahead and manage all of these three ESXi hosts that are in a cluster. And I'm running VMware vSphere 8 to do all that. As far as networking goes, I've got a management network here. That's my home network of 192.168.1.0. And here's my management computer right here. And the vCenter server is right here at .111. And both the vCenter server and also individually for my management computer, I can manage and work with these three ESXi hosts off the 192.168.1 network at these IP addresses respectively. However, for the network-based storage, I currently have a Synology DS220, and I'm about to add yet another one, and that's in a separate layer 2 broadcast domain. And the address space I'm using for the storage is 10.4.0.0, and the last octet for each of the hosts is their same number here, 101, 102, 103 respectively. And that is a 24-bit network. And I've got a dedicated network interface card on each of the ESXi hosts that connects to that 10.4.0 network. So I currently have a little Synology device right here that's acting as an iSCSI target for the data stores that each of these ESXi hosts can use. And that is at .252 on the 10.4.0 network. Just so you know the details here, I also have another interface on this little NAS device that's on the 192.168.1 network, also at .252, and that way I can work with and manage that NAS device directly if I need to. And the current connectivity from the ESXi host to this 10.4.0 network is going through this logical layer 3 interface in vSphere referred to as a VM kernel adapter, and I'm using VM kernel adapter number 1 for that, and the uplink that I'm using is VMNIC1 that connects to that 10.4.0 network. So think of this like a logical layer 3 interface, that's the VM kernel adapter, and the VMNIC, think of that like the physical network interface card connecting to that network. So here's our game plan for today. I'm going to add another Synology DS220 Plus, very similar to the one that's there, and I'll place that on the same network. So it'll be on the 10.4.0 network, and its IP address is going to be .243. And this NAS device has two interfaces, so the other interface I'm going to connect to my management network and use the same last octet as well, 243 on the 192.168.1 network. So initially, this NAS storage device will have two network interface cards. One that's going to be used by the ESXi host as they interact and use that storage, and the other interface will be used by me when I manage and work with that NAS device. Also, I would be interested in the comments about what your opinion is of perhaps taking both those interfaces and using them for iSCSI multipathing. Because potentially that could give more bandwidth as we have multiple ESXi hosts that are going to be using that storage. But in that case, I would lose direct access to that NAS device from my management network. So in the comments, let me know if you think I should dedicate both interfaces for storage or just have one interface for storage and one interface for management. Let me know. So to add this new device, I went out to Amazon and I purchased a brand new Synology DS220 Plus. And that's the device that has the enclosures and the case and the network interface cards. And then I have these two Seagate IronWolf 8 terabyte drives that I'll install into that NAS device. Now, currently the two drives and the NAS device, they are all in the boxes. So let's turn on the other camera and let's open them up, and I'll install the two 8 terabyte drives into the Synology DS220 Plus. And here they are. So this is the actual Synology NAS device. Fantastic. And then I have not one, not three, but two of the IronWolf 8 terabyte hard drives. So as far as which one to open up first, let's open up the Synology first. So we'll go ahead and tilt it up here, open it up. And here it is. Let's go ahead and pull this out and take it out of its little protective casing here. And here it is. So on the back, it's got the power connector, there's a USB port, and then there's the two Ethernet ports with RJ45 jacks. All right, looks great. Let's go ahead and take a look at the other side. And on the other side here, we have the front door. So go ahead and pull that off. There we go. So there's the front. Looks like some protective material there. We'll pull that off in just a moment. And there is the spot for the two drives that we can insert. So here is a quick installation guide. Great, great, great. We'll set that to the side. And then we'll open up this part right here. And here is a power cable. Fantastic. And as we look further here, I have an RJ45 patch cable, probably Cat 6 that supports 1 gigabit because that's the speed of the interfaces. And then last but not least, we have the transformer that we'd use to actually power the NAS device. Let's see if there's anything else in here, and there is. So there's yet another RJ45 patch cable. Fantastic, because it does have 2 interfaces, so we have a patch cable for each one. And let's see if there's anything else, and indeed there is. So I've got some little screws, and I'm imagining these are for installing the actual hard drives into the enclosures as part of the NAS device. All right, so we'll set those aside as well, because we'll probably need those. So let me move the box out of the way. Let me also do a little bit of cleanup here, so we no longer need that. And I'll also go ahead and take the door for the NAS device and remove the protective plastic piece here. So we'll take that off and set that there. Next, let's bring in the hard drives. So here are the hard drives. Let me go ahead and open them up. All right, so as we open this up, we'll take out the paperwork, and there is the drive right here. So we'll open that up, and here is the hard drive. So I'll set this box aside, and then I'll do the same thing here for disk number 2, because scientifically it's been proven that these disks are going to install better in this NAS device if they are out of the box. So these 2 drives are in some static sensitive protection. I would imagine they are anyway. So before I take them out, I also want to point out that I'm on a grounded static mat, and also my body is grounded to the same source. And the reason I'm doing that is to reduce the risk of damaging the electronics due to static electric discharge. And I would encourage everybody else to do the same. If you're working with electronics, make sure you're properly grounded and being safe. So with that said, let me take these drives out of their protective wrappings. And for the details on this drive, let me go ahead and zoom in a little bit. So this is one of the 2 drives that I'll be installing in the Synology NAS device. So there's the back side, here's the front side, and I'm going to take a peek at the quick installation guide just to make sure I'm not going to miss some critical step. So this looks pretty amazing. There's actually no step-by-step instructions, it's just pictures. Oh, I love it. So if you're a visual learner like myself, you're in for a treat, because this manual is just going to walk us through how to do this with pictures. So it looks like the first step is to go ahead and remove the door, which is already removed, so it's right here. And then the second step is to go ahead and pull out the drive enclosures. So I'll do that next. Here's our Synology device, and based on the instructions, I just need to push right here and pull out the first one, and there it is, little drive enclosure, and the same thing for the second one. Push up and pull out the enclosure, and so far, so good. Looks like we're going to move on to step number 2. And for step number 2, it wants us to take the little rails here that are built into the drive enclosures and pull them out. So we'll go ahead and pull out that one. Oh, these are really easy. No forcing required, just pops right out. So there's the second one. I'll go ahead and leave that on the right-hand side. Also, I'm going to put these close to where they belong, and then I'll repeat that process for the second drive once we get to that as well. So let me go ahead and do one drive first, and then we'll do the second one. So our next piece as part of step number 2 is to put the drive in place right here, and then simply push the rails back in. Great, so I've got the drive right here. You go ahead and take it, and we want the connector, which is this part right here, to be reachable, so we're going to put the connector on this side. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and simply place this in the tray. Oh my gosh, it fits like a glove. I love good engineering like that, fantastic. So I don't have to really wonder, did I get in there right? It felt like it just kind of slid into place with a gentle click. Next, it wants me to put the rails back on. That's this step right here. And I'll put it on the rail here first, and it just clicks into place. Fantastic. Then I'll do the same thing for the second side here. I'll just go ahead and put it in place. It just pops right in. So I think we're done with this part of step number 2, installing the drive, putting the rails back on. Let's take a look at this piece next. Oh, and this part right here is if we have a 2.5-inch drive versus a 3.5-inch drive. So because we have a 3.5-inch drive, it's already done. So here, that's also what the screws are for. So if we have a smaller drive, you'd place it in and then put in the screws from the bottom. All right, so we are done for our situation. We're done with this step number 2. Next, let's move on to step number 3. Where is step number 3? Oh, there it is right there. Okay, here we go. So step number 3 is taking the drive in the drive enclosure and placing it back into the NAS device. So before I do that, let me take this second enclosure. We'll take the second drive, do the same process here. All right, so now with both drives ready to go, let's go ahead and put them both into the NAS device. Now it has a little label, a little indicator here that says up right there. So that's the side that's going to go up as we install it. So there's a little close-up so we can see it. So we're going to go ahead and install it with the little arrow pointing up. So we'll take our NAS device and take our first drive with the arrow pointing up and slide it into the bay. And that slides in great. And it did a really soft click as I pushed it all the way in. So to take this out, just like we did originally, we go ahead and push this little button right here, and that allows us to pull the drive out. So we'll go ahead and repeat that process of putting the drive in for the second one. We'll find the little indicator that says up, and we'll line that up with the Synology, and we'll simply slide it in, and then nice gentle click at the end, and now these two drives are physically installed in the NAS appliance. So now we have the drives installed. The next step is to go ahead and put the door on, which is right here. So we'll go ahead and put the door on next. And so for the door, it shows a push, and it wants us to push in this side first. And if you look at the back here, it's just basically 4 holders that kind of keep the door in place. There's no actual hinge, it just pushes on. So we'll go ahead and install the door. So I'm simply going to line it up a little bit and just give it a gentle push. And oh my goodness, that was so easy. So that door is installed and the 2 drives are inside. So in the rack behind me, I've got a shelf with the other Synology device. And before I place it back there, I'm going to go ahead and plug this into my local network and do the initial configuration for this NAS device. So let's confirm our plan here. I want one of its interfaces to have this IP address, 192.168.1.243 on my management network. That's right there. And I want the other interface to have the IP address 10.4.0.243, and that'll be on my storage network. So I'm going to grab a fairly long Ethernet cable here. And so I'm going to take this Ethernet cable and I'll plug one end over on a switch that's in my rack. I'll put it in the management network, the 192.168.1 network. And I'll put the other end of this cable into the first Ethernet port. So these are labeled LAN 1 here on the left and LAN 2 on the right. Let me zoom in so you can see that. So I'm going to connect to LAN 1 with one end of this cable. So that's just the Ethernet cable there. And the other end of that cable, I'm going to plug into the switch that's over by my rack. I'm also going to take the power cable that came with it and plug it into a power strip, and then plug the other end into the transformer here, and then plug this end into the NAS for power. All right, so we'll plug this transformer into power like that, and then this end I'm going to plug here into the NAS device. All right, so I've got LAN 1 connected, I've got power connected. Let's take a look at the front. So before I power this on, I think it'd be wise for us to identify, or at least consider, what is the IP address that either by default or through DHCP this NAS device is going to have, so I can connect to it and manage it. Also, check it out. I don't think I touched that, but it is now powering up. So I'm going to put this in a horizontal position because these are not solid state drives. And so I want them to be nice and happy and not have a lot of disturbance as far as the angle that they're currently spinning in. So with this powering on, let's go ahead and find out what the IP address is going to be. So now I've got that NAS device connected here physically to my management network. There is a DHCP server. DHCP is an acronym for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. Think of it like a device that just hands out the appropriate IP addresses and all the details like a default gateway and everything else on a network. So I have a DHCP server on this network. This is very likely a DHCP client. Now, how do we find what the current IP address is that it has? So I peeked at the documentation and it said, besides powering it on, step number 4, it said we could also go to find Synology.com using HTTP, or we could go to Synology NAS :5000, which represents the TCP port 5000. So what this should allow us to do is to both find and connect to our NAS device on the local network. Also, I've confirmed in the background that there's a whole bunch of little LEDs, little light emitting diodes that are on the front of that NAS device, including a little blue right next to the power button. So that looks to me like it's up and ready to go. So let's open up a browser and go to find.synology.com. So here we are, and what it did, it actually redirected me to https://finds.synology.com. And now it's searching for Synology devices. So here it says it found one. Now this one right here is the 192.168.1.252. That's my existing NAS device I currently have. It is a DS220 Plus. I'll hit the arrow here to the right. This is the 10.4.0.252, which also is the other interface for that same NAS device. So that's not our new one. I'll click on the right arrow once again. And this, based on the IP address 192.168.1.123, that's in the range of my DHCP assigned addresses. So here is the actual new NAS. We could also double check the serial number. So because this is the correct device, let's go ahead and click here on Connect. So I'll go ahead and accept the EULA, that's the End User License Agreement. We'll click on Next. We'll click on Continue. And it's walking us through the setup. Okay, I like it. So we'll click on Setup. It wants us to install the latest DSM, which I assume is the Disk Station Manager software, DSM right there. So I'll click on Install Now. It's also warning me that there's 2 disks inside that NAS device, and I understand that all data on these disks will be removed. And so I want to make darn sure that I'm on the new device and not on one of my existing NAS devices. So this is the new one based on its IP address. So I'll say yes, I'll take the risk, click on OK, and away it goes. So it says it'll take approximately 10 minutes. Don't turn off the power during the procedure. So I'll let that do its magic for a few minutes here, and we'll continue when it says it's ready to continue. So for the countdown, it took about 3 of the 10 minutes, and now it's continuing with the launching or installation of the built-in packages as part of the software that comes with this Synology NAS. All right, so it wants me to go ahead and click here on Start for DSM 7.1. So I'm going to call this vSphere NAS 2. For the administrator account, I'll use the name of Keith, and I'll put in my lab password. So I put in my lab password, I repeated the lab password, and it's a fairly weak password, and that's because it's the same password that's pretty easy to remember. I use in all my lab gear. So I don't use it for anything personal or confidential. I just use that same password almost everywhere in my lab environment. Then I have a choice regarding opting in or not, regarding IP address and port information. I'm okay with that. It's next asking how we want to handle updates. I'm going to say just notify me when updates are available, and I'll manually install them, because if I have a whole rack of servers that are using the NAS device, I don't want to have a update and possibly a reboot happen when I'm not aware of it. So I'll say, please notify me. I'll do it myself. Click on Next. It's asking me if I want to either sign in or create a Synology account. I'll skip that for now. We can opt in or not for data analytics. I'll leave that off. I'll click on Next. So we are good to go. It's asking if we want to create a storage pool and a volume. I'll click on Create Now. Click on Start. So for RAID type, I've got the SHR, which is Synology Hybrid RAID, and it's showing us the number of drives and the fault tolerance. And there's also RAID level 1, which is effectively going to mirror the drives. Then we've got RAID level 0, which is no mirroring, no fault tolerance. So I'm going to go ahead and use the SHR, which is the Synology Hybrid RAID, and click on Next. So I'm going to select both drives. So the estimated capacity is 7.3 terabytes, and that's because of the fault tolerance. So if we used RAID level 0, we'd have available 14 terabytes because there's no fault tolerance. But I do want the fault tolerance, so I'll accept that and click on Next. Now it's asking us if we want to do a proactive check on the drive or skip the drive check for now, which I'm going to skip for now based on time, and click on Next. So I'm going to put a 4000, and that way I'll still have some extra space for other purposes later. And I'm going to use this as an iSCSI target. So I'm going to label the volume iSCSI, click on Next. I have a choice of file systems. I'm going to take the recommended one, BTRFS. Click on Next and click on Apply. It's asking me to make sure I want to do this. I'll click on OK. So it's now in the process of creating the pool, formatting the drives, and creating that volume that's going to have 4 terabytes available to it. All right, let me go ahead and minimize the widget here for system health. Also, before we get too far into this, I want to make sure I have the right IP addresses based on my lab environment that I want to use. So I'm going to click up here on this icon and then go to Control Panel. Then I'm going to go down to the Network section, and let's see if we can find it. There we go. Under Connectivity, Network, and we'll click here on Network Interface. And for LAN 1, I'm going to connect that to my management network, and let's take a look at my IP addressing. So my goal here is to use this IP address 192.168.1.243. So let's go ahead and modify the address on LAN 1 to that IP address. And then while we're at it, we'll also configure the second LAN interface to be 10.4.0.243. So let me expand that. We'll look at the details, and I want to edit this. So we'll click here on the Edit button. And I want to use a manual configuration. And based on our plan, I want LAN 1 to have the IP address of 192.168.1.243. So I'll change that to 243. The default gateway looks good. The DNS server, let me go ahead and use a Google DNS server at 8.8.8.8. And for the MTU, I'm going to go ahead and say I want to use a bigger MTU to support jumbo frames. And I don't want to do any 802.1q tagging. I'm just going to go ahead this natively plugged into an access port on my switch. So we'll click OK there. It's going to restart network services. Are you sure you want to continue? I'll say yes. Also, because we're currently connected to the .123 address, once this is done and it updates its network settings, I'll need to reconnect to the appropriate address. So once again, I'm going to go to findsynology.com, or I could just go to 192.168.1.243, and that would work as well. So I'll do the find.synology.com. And this isn't a bad idea, because if for some reason the network configuration didn't take, or we put in the wrong IP address, we can still go ahead and find it using the URL. So here's the first one. This one, my existing NAS at 252. There is 252 also on the other interface. There's 253. which is also not the one we just set up. And we'll hit the right arrow. And there we go. vSphere NAS2, that's the name we gave it. There's the same serial number. And there is the IP address ending in 243, which is the IP address we just configured. So we'll click on connect. I'll log in as Keith. That's the username I configured. And I'll put in my lab password. And I'm going to click here to stay signed in and click on the arrow. And it's asking me to register for an extended warranty. I'll go ahead and skip that for now. All right, so for network interface, besides LAN 1 now having the right address, I also want to configure LAN 2. So we'll click on LAN 2, click on edit. And based on our plan, I want that interface to have the IP address of 10.4.0.243 with a 24-bit mask. So I'll put a 255 in that third octet. The default gateway, it's not going to need one. No DNS server needed there either. So let me go ahead and click OK there. Save that. Oh, I also want to make sure I set the MTU to 9000 so it can support jumbo frames. So I'll select LAN 2 again, click on edit, and set the MTU value manually. So I put the MTU at 9000, and it says some of your settings are invalid. Why is that? It liked it on the other interface. Let's click on OK. Yeah, it doesn't like that. Let me click on cancel, and don't save. And let's go to LAN 1, click on edit. And that has an MTU of 9000. Maybe it just doesn't like it because I don't have a default gateway or something. Let me click on cancel, and let's give it what it wants. LAN 2, edit. Let's say the default gateway is, and a DNS server is 8888. And then set MTU value manually. And it does not like that. So I'm going to have to come back and figure out why that won't set to a value of 9000 like the other one does. Now, in the event that it's not possible to set LAN 2 to a value of 9000, I'm going to have to swap those out and have my management network on LAN 2 and have my storage network on LAN 1. So I'll sort that out later, but for now, that's the IP address that we want. So I'm going to go ahead and click right here to come back to this screen, and let's go to SAN Manager, click on OK, and let's go to iSCSI, and I'm going to add an iSCSI target because that's what I'm using in my lab environment. So I'm going to go ahead and just call this target 1. I'm not going to enable CHAP authentication. Click on Next. I'll create a new LUN, click on Next. We have almost 4 terabytes of space available. It's asking how much do I want to use. Let me use 2000 gigabytes, which is 2 terabytes, and it's asking how we want to provision it, meaning do we want to tie up all that space immediately, or do you just want to tie it up as it's being used? I'm going to go ahead and say thick provision that 2 terabytes and click on Next. And we'll click on Done. All right, so we have this iSCSI target with about 2 terabytes available. So for the next step, I'm going to move the Synology to the back of my rack. I have a shelf back there. And I'll plug in LAN 1 to my management network once again. And then I'll plug in the LAN 2 interface to a switch port that's associated with my storage network, again on the back of my rack. Also, before I move this, I just did a quick search on how to gracefully shut down a NAS device. And it says I should press and hold the power button for about 4 seconds. It'll beep, and then it'll proceed to do a graceful shutdown, an orderly shutdown of the NAS device. And that's better than just pulling the power and having the disks be at risk due to a power loss. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm not going to tilt it because the drives are currently spinning, but I'm going to go ahead and press the power button for 4 seconds. And it started flashing, and there's the beep, and now it's doing a graceful shutdown. Fantastic. So I'm going to give it a moment to complete that, and then once it does, I'll move this over to the rack. So it is currently powered off, and before I move it back there, I'm also going to label it. And that way, because I know we'll have 3 of these back there, I can visually see based on the label which one this is. So I'm going to call this vSphere NAS2. If you have a label maker, that's great, but this will serve our purposes now, and I'm going to move this back to the rack. All right, so it's now plugged in the rack, and I'm wondering now that I've both connected, let me see if LAN 2, if we click on Edit here, if we can use a larger than default MTU. So just drop down, oh, sure enough. So it wasn't plugged in, and so it didn't want me to be able to change it, but I want it at 9000 as far as the MTU, which is effectively allowing us to use jumbo frames, and I don't need a DNS server associated with this interface, nor a default gateway. That's just my storage network, and we'll click on OK. It's going to say it's going to restart network services. I'm going to say yes. So the last piece of our puzzle is to allow these ESXi hosts to go ahead and access that network storage at the 10.4.0.243 address. So to do that, we're going to go from our management computer, log into vCenter using the vSphere client, and then through the vSphere client using vCenter, we'll configure these ESXi hosts to be able to reach that new storage that we just set up on the 10.4.0 network. So this is the vSphere client. Let's take a moment and just verify our current storage. So we have ESXi 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are local data stores on each of the ESXi hosts, and then we have the Synology that was already in place. And currently, if I click on hosts here, I've got 4 of our ESXi hosts that have access to that data store. And the way they're accessing that data store, if we go to our host and clusters view and grab one of our ESXi hosts and go to configure, Under storage adapters, I've got this storage adapter, this iSCSI software adapter. And if we click on devices, it's showing that I have an existing Synology iSCSI disk. And if we scroll to the right here, currently I have a data store called Synology 1. And the capacity there is almost 7 terabytes. And so to add the new Synology device, we'll click right here on Dynamic Discovery. I'll click on Add, and I'll say, you know what? We've got another NAS device. And in our case, it's an iSCSI target, and it's reachable at 10.4.0.243. And that's the default port that this can be listening on, and we'll click on OK. So it wants me to go ahead and do a rescan. So with that SCSI adapter selected, we'll go ahead and do a rescan adapter. And now, if we click on devices, we should have our second one. There it is, just under 2 terabytes. So now ESXi 1, that rack server, knows about this additional disk that's reachable via iSCSI over the network. And I'm going to do the same thing for ESXi 2, 3, and 4 as well. So go to ESXi 2, select its iSCSI software adapter, click on Dynamic Discovery, click on Add, and put that IP address in of 10.4.0.243, and click on OK. And then we'll click on Rescan Adapter. We'll go to ESXi 3, do the same thing. Select the iSCSI adapter, click on Dynamic Discovery, click on Add, and put in the IP address of our Synology NAS at 10.4.0.243, and click on OK. And based on the recommendation, we'll rescan adapter, and ESXi 4, same thing. Select the iSCSI adapter, click on Dynamic Discovery, and click on Add, and put in that IP address of 10.4.0.243. And we'll click on OK. And then we'll click on Rescan Adapter, and this is going to verify that on all 4 hosts, they can see that storage. So we'll grab the adapter here on ESXi 1, click on Devices, and there is that second Synology at 1.95. Perfect. ESXi 2, same thing. Grab the adapter. And on ESXi 2, if we click on Devices, it does not see it. Let's go back and make sure I have my NAS correctly configured to allow multiple connections from multiple hosts. Because it looks to me like the ESXi 1 sees it, which it does right here. If we click on Devices, but ESXi 2 does not. Again, we select the adapter, click on Devices, and ESXi 3, I would imagine, probably the same situation. So we'll click on the adapter, click on Devices, and sure enough, it's consistent. Same with ESXi 4. The adapter, click on Devices, and it only sees the one. So there's probably a problem at the NAS where I need to tell it to allow multiple incoming connections. So back here at the control panel for the Synology device, we'll click on SAN again. We'll click on the iSCSI, and right here is the problem. Multiple sessions is set to disable, and I've got multiple ESXi hosts that would love to connect, and that would explain why the first one was able to connect and see the storage, and the other 3 were not. So let's click on Edit and find that setting. So here under General, it's not here. We'll click on Advanced. Oh, there we go. Allow multiple sessions from 1 or more iSCSI initiators. So the ESXi hosts are acting as initiators, and the NAS device is acting as the iSCSI target. So I'm going to go ahead and say allow multiple sessions from 1 or more iSCSI initiators. Click on Save. Verify that that's reflected here. Great, great, great. And let's go back to the vSphere client. And we'll verify ESXi 1 can see both. Great, great, great. We'll go to ESXi 2. We'll go ahead and click on the iSCSI adapter. Click on Devices, and it only sees 1. Let me click on Rescan. And there it is. That was the problem. So we'll go to ESXi 3, same thing. Rescan the adapter, and click on Devices, and it sees both. And click on ESXi 4, click on the adapter, click on Rescan Adapter, click on Devices, and it sees both as well. Fantastic. All right, so now all my 4 ESXi hosts, all 4 rack servers can see that new device, but it's not yet set up as a data store. So if we want the ESXi host to be able to use it, it needs to be formatted with VMFS, which will happen if we create a data store. So to do that, we'll go ahead and right-click on the cluster. From the drop-down, we'll click on Storage. We'll click right here on New Data Store, and we're going to create a new VMFS data store. Click on Next. I'm going to call this iSCSI 2 as the logical name of the data store. And then as far as which host is going to go out and actually create this data store, I only need 1 to do it, so let me have ESXi 1 do it. And then after the formatting is done and the data store is created, the other 3 ESXi hosts can go ahead and use it. And for the target, we'll select the Synology, which is just under 2 terabytes, and we'll click on Next. And we'll use VMFS 6, which is the current flavor as of this recording. So that's the virtual machine file system. Number 6, we'll click on Next. So from here, I can specify how much of that do I want to use for this new iSCSI-based data store. And let's go ahead and let's just take all of it. So I'll take 2 terabytes, or very close to 2 terabytes, and click on Next. So here's a summary. We'll click on Finish, and we'll look at recent tasks. And it is creating that iSCSI-based data store using the iSCSI target that we just set up. All right, it says it's done. So if we go to each of our ESXi hosts, and I'm going to say rescan storage, and I'll do the same thing for ESXi2. In fact, if we're rescanning storage, we don't even need to select a specific adapter. Click on OK. ESXi3, rescan storage, OK. And ESXi4, rescan storage, and OK. And in just a moment, all 4 ESXi hosts should realize that there's a data store available on that new iSCSI target. So if we just do a spot check, let's go to ESXi3. We'll select our iSCSI adapter, click on devices. There's our 2 NAS devices. If we scroll over, it sees the first one is called Synology-1. That's the name of the data store. And then one we just put in place called iSCSI-2. We could also go to the storage icon here, select the iSCSI-2 data store, and then click on host just to confirm that all 4 hosts have access to it and source files on that iSCSI data store. Currently, we have no VM's files on it, but just as a quick check, let's go ahead and create a new VM and use that data store. So one quick way of doing that is to go back to our host and clusters view, right-click on our cluster, select new virtual machine. I'm going to go ahead and do it from a template. We'll click on next. I'll click on VM templates, and I've got a tiny Linux template that we can pull from. Click on next. We'll call this test of iSCSI2 data store. That'll be the name of the VM. As far as the location for this VM, I'll go ahead and put it here in a folder called small VMs. Click on next. And as far as which ESXi host is going to support this VM, I'll let DRS, Distributed Resource Scheduler, decide by just selecting the cluster and click on next. Then we'll specify that we want to use iSCSI2 as the data store. I'm also going to specify that I want to use thin provisioning, and then click on next. And I want to take a peek at the hardware settings before powering on that VM, and we'll click on next. So here's a summary for that VM. It's going to have 1 CPU, 128 megabytes of RAM. And for the hard disk, it's going to have a 64 megabyte hard disk. Again, very, very teeny. And it's associated with a distributed port group in VLAN 10. In fact, let me go ahead and change that because I don't have my firewall on at the moment. Let me just place that out on the distributed port group that's connected to the 192 management network. And that way it can have an IP address assigned via DHCP and be able to connect to the internet. And we'll click on OK, and click on Next, and then we'll click on Finish. So it should deploy that VM, and then it should go ahead and power it on. So if we go to My VMs, and go to Small VMs, and expand that, here's that little VM right there. And if we scroll down, look at the details, the disk files are being stored on iSCSI2, that's the data store. And if we open up a console of this little VM, let's go ahead and do a web console. This is that VM. If we do an ifconfig, it has the IP address of 192.168.1.123 that was assigned via DHCP. If we do a ping out to www.cbtnuggets.com and press enter, name resolution worked, internet connectivity works. We'll do a Control-C, and let's also do a trace route. And we'll do a trace route with no name resolution out to 1.1.1.1 just to verify the full path out to the internet. And that all looks good. So now if we were going to go back to our storage and to our iSCSI data store and look at the files by clicking on the Files tab, now we have the folder for that VM, which is right here. And inside that folder, here are all the files associated with that virtual machine, which at the moment is running. So the VMDK is the main hard drive. The NVRAM represents the BIOS on that virtual machine. And if we're doing snapshots, this little file here, the VMSD, would represent the snapshot database file. So thanks for joining me in this journey as we've unboxed, configured, and deployed a Synology NAS device to be used by my vSphere environment. And if you need additional details and training regarding VMware and vSphere specifically, please feel free to check out our content over at cbtnuggets.com, where I have a full library of VMware and vSphere training as well. So until next time, I hope this has been informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.
What you're putting in.